All right, let's jump right into it. We got Warren Martin, Kansas Strong, Jason Spees here with The Crude Life, as well as a myriad of other publications that we're going to be rolling out here. And now that it's 2026, so we're going to be doing that here very quickly. Warren, I have a wood burning stove going in the lakeside, swampside studios this week. So we're going to be getting that new studio by the swamp up and running with a little bit of Minnesota heat by wood fire and propane. How's it going in Kansas? What's your weather like?
It's foggy here, but I'm just surprised that you moved to Washington, D.C. That's impressive.
Yeah, we got that big swamp. You can't you can't escape it here. And I saw this morning Tim Walz dropped out of something. Either he's not going to run for governor or he's
I'm for
not going to.
governor.
Is that what it was? Yeah, I got the alerts and I didn't pay attention because I had this to talk about, and it's Landman, season 2, episode 8. And now that we got our obligatory or customary chit chat out of the way, what was your one sentence takeaway from this episode? Because I have one, and I'm not sure it's going to line up with yours.
Oh, I think that probably the one sentence that I would take away from it was when Cammy said, I don't remember exactly how she said it, but basically she said, "My word's going to mean something. I'm going to keep my word." And I think that really had to kind of overpinned everything that was happening in the episode, and everybody trying to keep some semblance of their integrity and their word in their lives.
So I've this is my first experience with Taylor Sheridan. I've never watched Yellowstone. I've never watched 1883 or whatever the different programs are. I think Tulsa King might be another one of his. Um, but I got to tell you, this was the best episode of Landman yet, by a mile. And I could go into 100 reasons why. For anybody who's been watching this episode, this was not only the most important episode for the whole story arc, but it was by far the best for storyline advancement as well as depth that I've never seen in an oil and gas um, show, oil and gas conference, in oil and gas anything. And we'll get into that today because he went into some new areas that is going to make the industry extremely uncomfortable, but they are realities. And we'll talk about those right now with Warren Martin. And let's start off with just Sam Elliott in the pool. He fell in. They're really hammering home how weak he is, both mentally and physically. And Tommy's got a perfect solution, which I loved his solution. We'll get into that a little bit later too. But the way they're setting up Sam Elliott is really remarkable because they've made him almost where you want him to die. And at the end of this episode, now you want him to live, and he wants to live. Warren, I think that was a huge story arc development, not only for the show, but for Sam Elliott and Billy Bob Thornton's relationship. What say you?
Yeah, I think that I I apologize for that. I think that when we're looking at Sam Elliott's character, I've really struggled with his character through this entire thing. What does he bring to the show? What does he bring? And I think that we're seeing a little bit of, if you look at what they showed us scenes from last episode into this one, you had Billy Bob Thornton's character, Tommy, that in those clips. Tommy says, "I'm going to start enjoying life from this point going forward. I'm going to focus on and enjoy life from this point going forward." And I think that the role that Sam Elliott is playing is that transitional role that is pulling Tommy out of that company man and into a position where he wakes up, quote, wakes up to the rest of his life. And it's done in some uncomfortable ways with Sam Elliott up to this point. And I'll be honest, I think that the solution that they came up with, I was a little uncomfortable with it at the end. But I think that that's really it. And even in this episode, you got TJ that talks about how He's, what's worse, a guy that's has full functioning use of his body but loses his mind, or a guy that has full use of his mind but loses his body. And those are struggles that everybody deals with growing as you get older and you start to age. You start thinking about those things. And I think it really kind of is peering in those visions.
Whenever Sam Elliott and Billy Bob Thornton, TL and Tommy are in the same scene together, it's bickering, it's fighting, it's negativity, and it's to the tune to where it's uncomfortable now. And that's why I believe that this was such a good transitional out of that, because I agree with you. I was wondering what Sam Elliott's purpose was. And now it's he he becomes a different person when the women are around. And it's not so much of the sexual nature that they're turning it every other element. Every other part of this show, it's sexual, except for the Sam Elliott part. They're actually trying to really detach the two, and that's the part that I find to be the most interesting, because they're almost trying to bring him back to life after the oil industry killed him. And then my prediction is that the oil industry is going to actually kill him in the season finale. That's where I see the storyline going, Warren, and that's why I think it's pretty uncomfortable, but at the same time, it is very good storytelling, very very real storytelling on how you can get this second wind at any time in life, as long as you have hope and as long as you have some feeling and something along those lines. And that's what kind of the women bring into the industry. That's how I'm taking this bigger storyline picture, that Sam Elliott's this old dying veteran that sees women coming in as more of a bright light to help the industry, as opposed to die the industry out, if you will. Help save the industry, really, that type of a thing. I don't. That's a little bit of hippie talk, I guess. You might have to go to Colorado to maybe get that deep. I guess New Mexico's legal too, so you can go to Carlsbad and do that as well and enjoy the caverns. But you get my point. That's a pretty deep thought, Warren, for this. Go ahead. What's your thoughts on my deep analysis of that?
Yeah, I can see that, and I definitely think that if you were in Colorado, I don't know, it'd be a deep thought or a high thought, but but uh, I I think there's some the writing that's taking place here when it comes around Sam Elliott is what he's finding in these women is he's finding when we first met Sam Elliott, he had wasted his entire life waiting on his wife to overcome her demons. And I think what we're seeing in him responding to the women around him is glimpses of him seeing his wife in those different characters, the wildness, the youngness, the love, and again, not sexual, as you say, not sexual in any way, but just the relationship that he waited his entire life to have. And I'm actually going to change my prediction that I made last episode, where I agreed with you that Sam Elliott was going to die and it was going to be something. I don't think it's going to be in the industry. I think that it's going to come down with Tommy having to making the statement that he's going to start enjoying his life and focusing on his life. I think it's going to come down to something happening in the business at the same time that Sam Elliott is dying. And Tommy has to choose, is he going to take care of the business or is he going to take care of his father? And Tommy's going to have to make a choice.
Warren's going back to the Tommy and TL storyline of the death, where I'm sticking with the cartel oil explosion into the death. It's a little more cinematic, I guess, but at the end of the day, it'll probably be he chokes on a hot dog, right? That's wouldn't that be poetic right there?
Yeah.
So let's move on here, because I think the next one that people probably are pretty confused about is the lawyers. A lot of the lawyer scenes was fantastic in this episode, because the people in charge had absolutely no idea what was going on. Cammy has no idea what's going on. It's all her money. Tommy's even a little bit confused. He's not really quite sure. And here these two attorneys are basically trying to carve out a whole new strategy and industry based on litigation. And that makes people uncomfortable, first of all, because as Cami pointed out, well, what about our word? What about our morals here? And the attorneys, their job isn't to care about morals. Their job is to care about the law and what the best strategy is involved with those different elements that you can use, all the way to the tune to where let's out litigate them, for crying out loud. And then we'll get into the whole geology part of proven and unproven and whether it's there or not, and why is this all of a sudden a wildcat when it was a proven resource. But first of all, the litigation side of thing, I it's real. It's real. It's not a storyline that's very sexy. It's not a storyline that is very, very exciting. And so they put it in there, and it's now out there, Warren. What's your thoughts on first of all introducing that, because it's a lot more common than people think, and also it's not a very exciting storyline, but it does the deal. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, lawyers by, trade for the most part. I mean, you got exceptions everywhere, but lawyers for the most part are about, especially corporate lawyers, are about risk mitigation. They're about how do you run the company with the minimum amount of risk possible? What's the best way forward? What's the cheapest way out? All of those things. It's all about risk mitigation. That really conflicts a lot of times when the oil and gas industry, when you're talking about a high risk, high reward industry, where high risk, high reward is the exact opposite of risk mitigation. And I thought that they did a pretty good job portraying that conversation, which is a very real conversation that constantly happens. I have a lunch today with some lawyers to talk about some issues within the oil and gas industry. And it's about how do you promote it versus risk mitigation? How do you deal with it? And anytime that you're in that situation, those are the two camps. The two camps are, how do we do what we want to do, which is what Cammie talks about. I want to keep my word. And the lawyers are there to really try and rein you back in and say, wait a minute, let's look at the risk mitigation here. I don't think that's a wise choice. And that's their job.
It's interesting too, Nate, the attorney, who still is the moral center of everything, the buzzkill of the show, if you will. But as I've always said, you have to have vanilla in order to get Rocky Road or any of these other flavors that you want out of ice cream. You still need vanilla. When you have the CNN or Fox News, you still have to have 5 minutes of actual news in order for the other 55 minutes to comment and speculate on. So much like with the crude life, we've always stuck with at least a center boring, as sterile as we can, put it out there so that shows like this can actually seem like there's some personality behind it. And so when I look at that, Warren, Nate's character is really almost becoming more of a villain, and he's the good guy. It's an interesting switch because you would laugh out loud at a lot of his comments early on, and now they're not as laugh out loud. In fact, even Tommy's kind of turned on him a little bit, and here he busted the girl for having a relationship, so it's on her record, and nobody likes a tattletale. And it's interesting how his character hasn't changed, but it has. From the public's view, at least from mine, like I'm starting to look at him like, well, why don't I like him? He was one of my favorite characters. I understand his role. I understand what he needs. Kind of like Angela. As much as she nauseates me, she's still one of my favorite characters because she's so important to this whole hot mess of a storyline that they're trying to pull off. So, what's your thought on Nate? Because it almost seems like he's going to come out and do something. he's too quiet.
Well, you got a commercial that's all about Captain Obvious, where they made fun of the idea of Captain Obvious. He's become Captain Obvious in the traditional non-funny sense, where his character there is to make the obvious statements that you would expect from someone who is a moralist, who is trying to keep control of a company and is trying to tamp everything down to where it's all peaceful. And most of what he says is what you would expect him to say. It's the obvious. And most people don't like that. They don't, Captain Obvious became a character in commercials in a funny way because they were able to put a spin on the one thing that no one likes, Captain Obvious.
Yeah, that's a good analysis there. Let's transition into the workplace romance that apparently has ended, or maybe not. I'm not sure. Between the geologist and the other attorney. And we all know that the geologist, he got his seat at the table by spending some time in the bedroom with the attorney. And turns out he's somewhat qualified. Whether, the standard, hey, we got to interview three candidates, the Rooney rule in NFL, where even they need to be minorities too. So none of that happened. It just okay. And then he came in and he kind of pulled a used car salesman on him to where he just kind of let the emotion carry it right into a 10% sure thing type of a deal. So that was interesting. The progressional storylines, the realities of how often that happens, where you might let your emotions get the best of you, whether it's in the bedroom or the boardroom, and then when the reality shakes you and your emotions start going away and you start seeing the trees from the forest, you realize what you've done. And that happened to Rebecca, even to where she took some self-analysis and said, he's exactly right with who I am. That's why I'm so shooken up right now, because somebody just held me accountable for the first time in my life. She's one of those girls that their parents spend way too much time telling them they're extra special. You know what I'm talking about, Warren? Because you and I have told our kids they're special too much. And there's parents that even go beyond us. So what was your thoughts on just the whole dynamic of the sex in the boardroom and now the reality and just that whole storyline? I liked that, where it finally went, actually.
Yeah, I mean it's a 1 hour show, so you can't really show what actually happens in those meetings. They simplified it down quite a bit. I think they simplified it down too much a little bit because that's generally not the way those decisions are made. I mean, you're talking about high risk, high reward. Even if you're going to somewhere where there's oil, you have proven field, and you know everything is as good as it could possibly be. You're still at just about a 60% chance of being able to put in a producible well, because you might get down there and where you drilled, the geology wasn't exactly right. And so what's interesting about this is it really is not unrealistic. I mean, here in Kansas, we do have some producers that are geologists and they can understand the geology. Most of the producers have a working knowledge of the geology, but they're not experts. They're not geologists. And so anytime that you're talking about this between the money makers and the geologists, you often find where the decision maker really doesn't understand everything the geologist is saying. And geologist really doesn't understand all of the economics that go into making it work. So here you will have a geologist that will work for months and months and months putting together the geology on a well site to be able to go and present a case to the producer, to the decision maker, and has to convince the decision maker that the geology is there in such a way that this is a good opportunity. You really didn't see that. You saw a geologist that kind of pulled out a couple maps and said, look at this map. This shows it's here. Well, I've looked at a lot of geological maps. None of them actually show that oil is there. They show you resolutions that show probabilities of oil being there. And so, I think that was truncated maybe a little bit too much. There's a lot more that goes into it, but the dynamic is usually there where the oil industry is so technical that nobody in the room understands all the details of what's going on. That's why you need the different experts in the room. And really the crux comes down to the decision maker having to choose between the experts and which one they want to go with. And a lot of times that does come down to a gut decision, or it comes down to, I want to keep my word and we're going to do this. it does come down to those ideas from time to time.
The way the storylines wove together in this particular episode, even Angela's trip to the casino was actually woven in with the boardroom as far as risk versus reward, emotion versus logic, science versus faith. Those were the three themes that I wrote down that just kept coming up in everybody's storyline, whether it's Sam Elliott, whether it's, like I said, Angela going to the casino. They made sure to go over the top of how her emotional gamble won, whereas Cammy is now entering into an emotional gamble. Will it have the same impact? Because at the end of the day, that's what Billy Bob is processing. Billy left a meeting that Cammy, the owner of the company, used her emotion, which was guided by her morals, which she wants to make sure her word is her husband and hers accurate, is that it was emotional decision for $400 million gamble, where now Billy Bob's wife takes $10,000, does an emotional gamble, and turns it into $300,000. That wasn't lost on me, Warren. Was that lost on you? I mean, it was about as subtle as a slap in the face, really.
Yeah, no, and they were making a clear comparison to gambling in all aspects of it. I think the difference though is that Angela, when she went to the casino, she supposedly only had $10,000 that she gave to all of the other people that were betting, and then she had was handing it out, and then she goes and starts throwing down on color and betting on color, and she bet way more than $10,000 because she never went above the $10,000 level, but she lost all the money leading up to that, and she went way above the $10,000 level, and that's where the disconnect for me kind of came in. I was like, yeah, it's easy to win at gambling if you have unlimited funds and you just got to keep playing until you hit. That's easy. That's not the oil industry. You have limited funds, you have limited investors, and the real risk is can you hit before you run out of dough?
See, they definitely got my memo that I don't do math on the weekends. And because I was with you after like the third roll, I'm like, okay, this math is not adding up here. And then like the one woman said, did she just win $90,000? And I'm like, okay, I apparently I failed math because I don't even understand how that works. But so, okay. But looking at that, definitely the theme was that the oil and gas industry, whether you're living it or working in it, it's a gamble. It is a risk reward, a high payout, bust, and that I know that storyline makes you uncomfortable for the industry, Warren, and they're continuing it. That in fact, like I said, it was about as subtle as a slap in the face for this episode.
That storyline doesn't make me uncomfortable. The storyline that it is a gamble. I mean, even oil producers for historically, I've got a book in here that was written in the 1800s that was talking. It's called The Gambler, and it's all about the oil and gas industry. It is a gamble. It is a gamble. It's high risk, high reward. It is a gamble. What bothers me is when you take it to the next step and they compare it to the cartel, and it is a legal gamble. It is a gamble that when it works, it helps people's lives. That's a very different gamble than running drugs for a drug cartel and taking a gamble with your freedom by becoming a drug runner or becoming a part of a cartel. Those are two different gambles. And so I have a problem with the oil industry being described as a gamble, but it's a legitimate gamble that's high risk, high reward, that when it does hit, benefits humanity.
Let's talk about the cartel for a moment because this whole season, this entire season, they've made the cartel as normal as possible. Like you're just going to a bank, you're just going to meet with an investor. There's nothing that the Andy Garcia's character has really done that has been villainous up till this point. Billy Bob keeps Tommy He keeps reminding us about what he did last season, how he executed a man right in front of him and that sort of thing. So they still do have that storyline going. But Warren, I'll be honest, this cartel storyline, you could put a venture capital firm in there. You could the way they're meeting in high skyscrapers in downtown Dallas. He's dressed to the nines. He's just moving money. He's not slinging drugs like the guerrillas in Colombia with the cartel. No, he's a venture capitalist. That's what I'm seeing more as a comparison than the oil industry, is that they're almost taking the oil industry away from the cartel and saying, actually, the people behind the scenes, those C-suite executives that come and go to venture capital firms and everything, that's where the real thing is. That's how I'm seeing this storyline being played out. That's why I keep saying this is almost more of an SNL scandal than anything oil and gas related. I mean, the bankers should be watching this, not the oil executives. Anyways, your thoughts on that?
No, and the question is, where does that go? Is that what's being written into this plot line? Is that the cartel is in some ways a legitimate business, which it's not, but in some ways it is a legitimate business, or is it once again a deepening of the comparison between the oil and gas industry and the fact that I'm sitting here saying the oil and gas industry is legitimate and betters lives, very much what Andy probably would say about his character and the fact that what he does is help people make money. He helps improve lives. He helps give jobs. And he would probably say the same thing. Is it a deepening of that comparison between how the cartel works and how the oil and gas industry works? The plot lines, we're going to have to wait to the end to figure that out. But, that's my fear, is that it's going down that road. But I agree with you, this season, it's all been about venture capitalism, not about cartel activity. But we know that the venture capital, the capital has come from the cartel activity. And
And he showed his true colors. He didn't care. I mean,
yeah,
he flat out knew that the widow, Demi Moore, Cammy, was walking into a failure, but he didn't care because at the end of the day, they're going to strip the company clean. And in fact, season 3 of Fargo was like that, where this Russian guy came in and took advantage of the parking lot king of Minnesota, and they basically just fleeced the company. But everybody involved made millions, because if you've got a protected company, you can do that. You can buy and sell companies, strip it for parts. All the executives profit handsomely. The insurance companies are involved. I didn't realize that they actually own the insurance companies until this season. That was a neat trick. That's what I see going on more than anything, Warren, is that whenever we talk about the oil industry and the cartel, at least for me, I try to take a step back and say we got to remind people the oil and gas industry at the core is trying to empower lives. It's trying to better human lives. The cartel is not like that. The mafia is not like that. Sure, they might go give $1 million to a church, but there's a price attached to that. Sure, they might go help a family out because so and so had cancer and they whatever, and he'll come in and he'll drop $20,000 off and some donuts. But there's a price attached to that. That's the difference with the cartel and with the oil and gas industry. One tries to empower you to be better with your individuality. The other one says, you're beholden to me, you're under my thumb. So I just want to make sure that is the difference of the good and the evil of the basic storyline that's being told here. I'm not sure they're telling that. Go ahead.
actually, and that's my point in this episode, when he does meet with Andy Garcia, when he meets with him and is talking about the deal that he's worked out with Cammy. Tommy's riled up about it because it's a bad deal for Cammy. And he explains it to Tommy and says, "This is what I did. Da, da, da. Now you tell me that you would have done anything different." And Tommy agrees. Nope, I would have done the same thing. And again, it's that comparison. Yes, that's the difference between what we're talking about there. That is the difference between those. But at the same time, Tommy is playing that part where he continually agrees that the oil industry is just like the cartel.
And that's where we get back to risk reward, science versus faith, and emotion versus logic. And the bigger picture in this is, and that was a very important scene that you just talked about, because at the end of the day, you have the two men agreeing what's best for Cammy. And this has been a bubbling storyline, not only in the oil and gas industry, but for Demi Moore's character, to where she finally had enough this episode, where here in comes this man, a little too aggressive for my taste, for somebody who's sitting alone in a place completely alone, and he parks it right next to her. When it's kind of like when you drive, when you park in a parking lot and all of a sudden there's a car next to you and the whole parking lot's open and you can't even open your door because he parked so close to you. It almost felt like that, Warren. Like, okay, that's weird. I'm in an empty arena and the guy comes and sits next to me and takes my I mean, what's going on here? Um, and then she flat out slapped him because he touched her, and that went so far beyond that specific moment to where she had so much bottled up. That's why I felt like this was such an important episode, because now she's allowing her hatred for men to come into the decision making. But then they did balance it because the geologist was a guy and everything. But that's part of it too, Warren, is that they are introducing that man versus woman, emotion versus logic, and that's the part I thought was done so beautifully in this episode, because that's a tough thing to pull off. Man, that's a tough thing to pull off. But they did it. You had Tommy and the cartel agreeing what's best for Cammy, and Cammy spending her whole season trying to find her own identity.
Yeah, and I think that when you're that scene that was in the bar, I think there's also that struggle of that anyone who goes through grief, anyone who goes through loss has, where at what point is it okay for me to move on? Because she acknowledges to Tommy that he was a very handsome man, which means that there was an attraction there. She saw an attraction. She started out talking to him. He just rushed it and went too fast and touched her. And I think the touch brought her back to reality, where the guilt came into her mind about her husband more than anything else. So, I think that element is very much a part of this.
No, I agree with that too. She's definitely a very complicated character, and they're continuing to expose it more and more. Cooper's crew, they're got to go work for somebody that was one of their subordinates, and now he's going to be in charge. That's Is that common anymore, Warren? Because in the old days, the oil and gas industry did a lot more like empowering people. Like if the one of the rig hands or a roustabout figured out a way that a tube could vibrate twice as fast and save half as much money, that type of thing. A lot of times they would help get that individual started with their own company, and then they're the president and the keeper of their own domain. Intellectual property, some attorneys, corporations, it's changed a little bit to where that's not necessarily the case. A lot of times now they get a promotion within the company maybe, and the company keeps the intellectual property. So that has changed a little bit there too.
That's big oil. It hadn't changed that much in independence.
I didn't think so. That's what I was going to ask you, if that was still
in
an independence. Good.
It's not uncommon for nepotism to take place, and a lot of times for the benefit of the company. We always see nepotism as a bad thing, but one of the things that we have a hard time really doing is keeping good employees in the oil and gas industry. And you're talking about, it's hard at the bottom end trying to get people just to pass a drug test, just trying to pass, the ability to show up for work, and we have a vehicle that gets them to work, because we have jobs that start where you don't even all you have to have is GED. And so you can come and start working. And then when you start out as a GED, it's really hard to rise above a certain level within any type of a company overall. But it's not uncommon for an independent. You have a son or a daughter that's worked around the industry their entire life. They know the industry, and they come in green. And it's very common for them to have to go out and work as a worm and have that experience a little bit, but then quickly elevate and quickly rise to a more prominent position. But working as a worm was not to qualify them for the position. It was to give them an understanding of what the people under them were, more than anything else. And so that's not highly uncommon, even in today's world, in the independent world.
And Tommy's character handled it perfectly by saying, "Yeah, he was working under you guys, and he's a rookie, but he's good at finding the stuff. He's 6 for 6." And the crew said, "Well, we got work. Let's get to work." And that's really at the end of the day how it works. You do have some conversations about some uncomfortable things that you got to get over. A lot of times they're ego driven, and that was a conversation that was ego driven by a crew. They realized it and they moved on. I actually thought that was one of the more realistic parts of the oil and gas industry, to be honest, Warren.
And I think the key was one of the other things that Tommy said was he's not afraid to say what he doesn't know.
Yep.
And I think that, that's where nepotism becomes a bad thing. Is nepotism becomes a bad thing when someone feels, if Angela was put into a position in the company to run a crew, then you would have all kinds of chaos that would break out because she feels entitled. She feels that it's her right, that it's just the way that it should go. Whereas that's a very different type of placement than putting Cooper in there, who's not afraid to say, "I don't know what I'm doing here. So tell me what I'm doing." And I think that's a big difference.
What I wrote down for Angela and Ansley, not much. Her storyline was more the gambling comparison, really. So her storyline was primarily a supporting storyline for the bigger gamble that's being done. But what really came out of it, in my opinion, the way that she is, because she, somewhere in there is a good person. It's just wrapped in a lot of narcissism and entitlement and untouchableness. But what she represents more than anything, Warren, is value is place and time on her terms. And that is an oil and gas thing, to where there are certain individuals, and sometimes they're right, but sometimes it is an emotional value is place and time. And does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Yeah, talk about that, how that is a little bit in the oil and gas industry, because the conversation we just had about Tommy and his son, that's an example. Value is place and time. The kid's got value here, but he doesn't here, so it's place and time. Let's get to work. With the women, it's a little different because they're a little more emotional. That was always when I was growing up, that was always the big argument why there should not be a female president, because they might get too emotional and push that button. That's the basic 80s logic, me growing up as a kid. That's how I was raised. But I look at that, and the value is place and time is a very important thing in the oil and gas industry, because you've got geology and you've got price points, you've got supply chain. I mean, it's again, this is a little bit deep, and I'm trying to help Angela's character out here by giving her some more value into the storyline, because I think she does have value. But just the value of place and time. You can start with price. Just start there. Let's go with that.
Well, I think you're right that it really does come down to place and time, and that's all the way through the industry. I'll start with the roughneck. What I was just saying a while ago, that it's really hard to find employees and to find value at place and time. Getting someone who can pass a drug test, who can get themselves to and from a rig and can show up on a regular basis. And in some cases, you have some very hardcore individuals that are working these crews. It's hard to find a good crew that consistently shows up on a regular basis. That's getting harder and harder because there's a lot of people that don't want to do the manual labor. And so it starts there and it goes all the way through to, right place and time, the value and right place and time when it comes to the investors. Are you asking for the money at the right place and time? Are you putting together the deal at the right place and time? The right place and time when it comes to dealing with the landowners and the mineral rights owners. Is it the right place and time for them to sell? It doesn't matter how good your deal is if they won't sell to you. And so you could look at it at every single level And you could have a perfect deal, and it only takes one of those elements to be out of, and you bring, I'll end where you wanted me to begin on price point. You could put together the entire deal, and if it's going to cost you $60 a barrel to lift that oil out of the ground, and oil is coming in at $50 a barrel right now, then it's the wrong place and time to put in that well and bring it online, because you're going to start losing money. And especially when you first bring it online, because that's when you make your big play. That's where you get your big bucks, and you want to erase as much of the debt that you have on that as you possibly can in those first few months of the well's production. So it all comes down to right place and time.
And we're going to take this and transition into the final thoughts here of my notes. And then if Warren has anything beyond that, we can certainly get into it. But I wanted to transition the place and time because with Angela, it's very noticeable, you know, and the part that I actually wrote it down when it became like clicking in my head was when she just casually said, "Is your stripper going to stay for dinner?" And Billy Bob looks at her and says, "You mean physical therapist?" And she's like, "Honey, her plate says hot lips or whatever." And so she's a stripper. And so she knew, but she didn't care because she understood what was happening. She understood what the end result was. And this is a storyline that I think a lot of people are going to miss when it comes to the oil and gas comparison, because they're going to get caught up on the stripper. They're going to get caught up on some of that, when at the end of the day, this was just a custom problem that needed a custom solution. And Tommy went and took care of it, knowing the customization from beginning to end. That's how I looked at this, Warren, to be honest. When I took away, you know, the social nuances and just looked at the root core of things from a landman's perspective, that's what I saw. A custom problem that affected his life, and he could deal with it. And he did it in a way that he knew it would get the end result that it got. Did you ever think that I would look at it that way?
I, I kind of looked at it a little bit that way as well. Ironically, I was a little uncomfortable with how the episode ended with him in the pool. But what Tommy did for his father by going out and hiring the stripper is, and let me preface this, is not uncommon in practice. It is very uncommon in as far as going out and hiring a stripper. That's uncommon. But the practice is not uncommon. As I've told you before, I've worked in nursing homes before, and nursing homes work really hard to try and get singing groups, to try and get speakers, to try and get people to come in and do activities, to get kids especially, get kids to come into the nursing home, because the number one thing that people need is they need to move. The more you stop moving, the harder it is to get moving again, especially as you get older in age. And Tommy understands. I just need him to move. I need him to stretch. I need him to do something. And I needed him to do it in a way. He was not going to accept a physical therapist. He's not going to accept a medical person. We already saw that from the nursing home at the very beginning. He hated all of those people that were working at the nursing home.
Mm-hmm.
And so Tommy went out, just like a lot of people do, and found what is it that my loved one will respond to, and we'll get them moving a little bit. And let's make that happen. And so stripper was, of course, in this world that we are in Landman, it was what else would you expect? But what he actually did, getting someone that's not a professional to come in and help to get someone moving a little bit, that's a pretty common practice.
And just so everybody's clear out there, that this is where the storyline becomes very good, because, if I was writing it, for example, Jason Spiess as, an ordained pastor, I probably would have went with a yoga instructor, not a stripper. Jason Spiess, the founder of the Crude Life, I would have went with the stripper, because that's better on par with the Crude Life. And so that's where I do think the storyline was better than maybe like a YMCA yoga instructor, which would have been more passable and mainstream and probably reached more audience members that aren't as easily triggered. But this show is trying to be as true as possible. And there's probably more strip clubs in Midland than there are yoga studios, to be honest. I don't, I've never counted, but you could do the same thing every small town you go through. Is there more bars or churches? Okay, is there more strip clubs or more yoga studios? I mean, that's all Tommy was trying to get to, is that okay, you're a stripper. That means you do yoga and stretches and stuff, right? He even said that to make sure. Anyway, so that's where my mind was on that whole thing. That I do see where somebody who grew up a little bit more traditional, like a Cooper, for example, who's they're trying to establish as that old soul ethical person. The stripper might have been a trigger for them, when in actuality that's just good story. That's just might be a stereotype, but that's just good storytelling. Warren, your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on it are is, probably the one person that could always motivate me to get up off the couch and really get moving was my grandmother with a spoon, a wooden spoon. So, I don't know why they didn't go that route. That's when, that's
Right, because she got the grandma got him motivated to throw a punch or two when she was disrespected. So yeah, we could do that. But anyway, so that's pretty much all I got to wrap up here. Oil-filled relationships is the only other thing, but we got into that. So yeah, I go back to this, Warren. I thought this was the best episode of Landman yet, and I'm not even sure if there was one oil and gas scene. In the beginning, there was, when they said it's going to be a hot one. They had to make sure the first impression was of oil and gas, because, like I said, I don't even think there was a rig after that. Was there?
No, there was just the scene at the camp house, or the camp.
Yeah, there
Uh,
were some crew campsites, but
yeah,
I don't remember
yeah,
any
no.
actual well
And
sites.
no well sites or anything like that, really. And really the only thing that they talked about oil and gas that again, misusing a term, was the idea that this well that they're going to drill is a wildcat. Again, a wildcat by definition is drilling in a place where you don't know if there's oil there or not.
Hmm.
And the geologist was very clear. Oh yes, the gas is there. The question is, can we find it? So that's not a wildcat. That's not a wildcat. Maybe a long shot, because they already had a well there. They were already producing. But we did get some clarification that the reason it stopped producing is because they decided to drill deeper, and they messed up the integrity of the well. That's not a blowout. That's borehole integrity that they messed up somewhere, and they got a lot of pressure that was pushing up water and sand. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of where that goes, but we're getting a little bit more clarification on that.
Pop quiz, just as my mind kind of thinks a little bit here. Do those gas pockets move much underground? I know tectonic plates can shift, and you got some sinkholes, and the earth does move underground, but I guess I've never really heard of much of that. Does that happen much? Does that? No, I didn't
So
think so.
I mean, you're talking about a resource that comes predominantly from marine animals, that takes millions and millions and millions and millions of years for it to change into kerosene and turn into oil and natural gas. And then here we are, millions and millions and millions of years later, and we're pulling it out of reservoirs. So just think, if it moved very much, it would just be swimming around the earth. Really, the only time it moves is when you have a tectonic shift. You have an earthquake that causes a fault line, and it might escape from one impermeable layer into the next impermeable layer above it. But for the most part, they're stagnant. Now, as you begin to pump out that resource and get that resource pumped out of its reservoir, as the reservoir gets smaller, it will migrate to the highest point of the reservoir, because it's always trying to rise up. And so you can have a well that may be on the edge of a reservoir, and yes, it'll move away from it, because as you take more out, it's moving to the highest point, and now your well hole is below the level of the hydrocarbons. But for the most part, those reservoirs are pretty stagnant.
My mind was just going about what the cliffhanger finale is going to be. If it's, because obviously it's going to be something out on the Gulf of America, the Gulf of Mexico. That's like a big cinematic money shot. And then, given the BP Gulf issues, I could see them revisiting with a blowout in the Gulf. But I'm kind of hoping Daniel Day-Lewis makes a quick cameo and walks up to Andy Garcia and says, "I drank your milkshake with a straw." I hope that's the season finale is Daniel Day-Lewis's character. "I drank your milkshake." That's one of my favorite movies of all time. Oh man, such a there will be blood. All righty. So Warren Martin, Kansas Strong, Jason Spees here with The Crude Life, Landman, Season 2, Episode 8. We'll be back next week. Any final thoughts here?
No, I thought it was a pretty good normal episode. I mean, it was nothing too crazy out there, and really moved the plot line along. And I thought it was a good one.
See you next week.